At Christmas dinner, my son stood up and said, "Toast to Mom's final Christmas with us." Everyone raised their glasses. My daughter-in-law smiled. Then I stood up, pulled out an envelope, and said, "Before we toast, I have my own announcement." The room went silent, and their faces turned white. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, each one placed with exact precision along the linen tablecloth. I stood at the head of the table, adjusting the final napkin ring. The air smelled of pine boughs and the prime rib resting in the kitchen. It was a perfect tableau, one I had constructed for over 30 years. But this year, the perfection felt like a stage set, and I was the only player who knew the true third act. They were coming to witness what they believed was my gentle sunset. I was preparing to show them a dawn they never saw coming. The doorbell chimed, a cheerful sound that felt like a starter's pistol. I smoothed my dress, a deep emerald silk, and went to greet them. Their voices entered first, a wave of forced holiday brightness that rushed into the foyer ahead of them. "Mom, the house looks incredible," Marcus said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. His hug was brief, his eyes already scanning the room, assessing, I knew, for signs of decline. Dust on a shelf, a wobble in my step. He saw none. Chloe followed, her smile as polished as the ornaments on the tree. "Ellie, you shouldn't have gone to all this trouble." She said it every year, but this year the phrase had a new, pointed weight. She handed me a bottle of wine and a beautifully wrapped basket of scented soaps, a gift for someone who needs soothing, not stimulating. My granddaughter, Lily, ran to hug my legs. "Grandma, we made cookies." The innocent joy in her voice was the only undiluted thing in the room. "I can't wait to try one," I said, my voice warm, the practiced hostess. I led them into the living room where the fire crackled. Marcus immediately went to the sideboard and poured himself a scotch, then one for Chloe. He did not ask if I wanted one. He assumed I would stick to my usual glass of sherry, a drink he associated with elderly aunts. "So, Mom," he began, settling into my late husband's armchair as if testing it for size. "How have you been, really?" The question was a trap, baited with concern. "I've been well, Marcus. Quite busy, actually." I took a seat on the sofa, back straight. He exchanged a glance with Chloe. It was a brief, silent transaction. I read it clearly. She's being brave. "That's good," he said, his tone dismissing my answer. "You know, you really should let us help more. With the yard, the heavy stuff. I was talking to Bill at the club. His mother is about your age, and they've got her in a wonderful community. Lots of activities, no maintenance worries." The words hung in the air, sleek and dangerous. I took a slow sip of water. "This house holds no heavy stuff for me, Marcus, and I've never been one for planned activities." Chloe laughed, a light tinkling sound. "Oh, Ellie, you're so independent, but it's okay to accept help. We're family." She leaned forward. "In fact, Marcus and I were thinking, after the holidays, we could sit down and just look at options, make a plan. It would give you such freedom." Freedom. The word, in her mouth, meant the opposite. It meant a tidy, predictable cage where I would be safe and conveniently located for babysitting. "A plan," I repeated, my tone neutral. How thoughtful. The conversation moved on, steered by Chloe to the children's school play, to Marcus's recent promotion. I listened, I nodded, I smiled. I performed the role of mother and grandmother, the quiet matriarch whose own story was presumed complete. I felt the shape of the envelope in the pocket of my dress, its crisp corner a secret against my thigh. It was my counterscript. As the oven timer chimed from the kitchen, I stood. "Dinner is about ready. Marcus, would you open the red wine to let it breathe?" He jumped up, eager to be useful in this small, sanctioned way. "Of course, Mom." I moved toward the kitchen. The swinging door had just whispered shut behind me when I heard their voices, lowered but not enough, carrying from the living room. She seems fine, Marcus said, doubt in his voice. She's putting on a good face for Christmas, Chloe replied, her voice pragmatic, cool. Did you see how thin she is? And she sold the grandfather clock last month. That's classic downsizing behavior. She's preparing, even if she won't admit it. We just need to guide her to the right place. The Silver Springs place has a 2-year wait list. We should get her on it. I stood very still, my hand on the cool stainless steel of the refrigerator. The clock had not been downsizing. It had been ballast thrown overboard to fund a new sale. Their conversation was not a shock. It was a confirmation. They had written my narrative without my consent. They saw my careful pruning of possessions as a symptom of withdrawal, not preparation for flight. They interpreted my quiet as emptiness, not gathering strength. I took a long, steadying breath. The anger was there, a cold, hard stone in my chest, but it was a useful anger. It fortified my resolve. They were so sure of their assessment, so smug in their planning. They had not bothered to truly look at me in years. I returned to the dining room, carrying the first platter. They were seated now, their faces turned toward me, illuminated by the candlelight. They saw a woman of 58, silver hair swept up, a familiar face they loved but did not see. They saw the end of a story. I saw the prologue. "Everything looks beautiful, Ellie," Chloe said, her smile warm with pity. "Thank you, dear," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. I unfolded my napkin onto my lap. I looked at the expectant faces of my family, at Marcus at the foot of the table, already reaching for the carving tools. The stage was set. The lights were on. They were all waiting for the curtain to fall on my act. I knew it was time for the plot to twist. Marcus carved the prime rib with a surgeon's concentration, laying slices on the china plates I had received as a wedding gift. The action was a ritual, one he had taken over after his father died. He saw it as a duty passed to him, like a title. I watched the red juice seep into the creamy mashed potatoes. The meal was flawless, each component a testament to a lifetime of practice. Yet it tasted like ash in my mouth. Every compliment was a pat on the head. "This is amazing, Ellie," Chloe said, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "You really outdid yourself." Her eyes flicked to Marcus, a silent message. "See, she's still capable. For now." "Remember Christmas when the boys were little and you made that entire turkey from scratch?" Marcus said, smiling at a memory I shared, but he was reshaping. "You were a force of nature in the kitchen, Mom, always doing so much." The statement was a landmine. It praised a past version of me while gently burying the present one. It said, "You were once great." I cut a piece of meat. "I still am, Marcus. The kitchen hasn't changed." He chuckled, a soft, condescending sound. "Of course you are. We just worry about you tiring yourself out." The conversation flowed around me, a river directed by them. My sister-in-law, Clara, asked about my garden. "The hydrangeas were so lovely last summer. Will you put in the same again?" Before I could answer, Chloe leaned in. "Oh, Ellie's been simplifying the garden. Less to manage. It's very sensible." She turned a bright smile to me. "I saw you replace the roses with those little shrub things. So practical." I had replaced the high-maintenance hybrid teas with rugosa roses, a hardy, fragrant variety that thrives on neglect. It was a choice for resilience, not surrender. "They require less spraying," I said, leaving them to interpret that as weakness. "It's smart," Marcus nodded, pouring more wine for everyone but me. My glass of sherry, barely touched, sat like a prop. "You have to think about the future. Less upkeep. We were even talking, Mom, how this house might be a lot for one person soon, the stairs alone." The directness of the probe made the air go still for a second. Lily, my 7-year-old granddaughter, looked up from her plate. "Grandma's house isn't too big. It's just right." I smiled at her, a real one. "Thank you, Lily." But the adults had latched onto the topic. Clara nodded, her face sympathetic. "It's a lot to consider, Ellie. But there are lovely places now, more like resorts." I let the comments hang, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. My silence was my shield. They mistook it for concession, for the quiet of a woman being worn down by their sensible logic. Then my son Robert, Marcus's younger brother, spoke. He was always more observant, less sure of himself. "Mom, have you been traveling at all? You mentioned maybe taking a trip a while back." I felt a flicker of hope. He had listened, but Marcus waved a hand. "Oh, Mom's not one for big trips anymore. Remember that cruise we suggested? Too much hassle," she said. He turned to me, his expression kind. "And that's okay. Your home is your sanctuary." He had taken my rejection of a garish, floating hotel packed with strangers as a rejection of all travel. He could not conceive of a different kind of journey, one chosen alone. The conversation spiraled into a shared excavation of my past. Remember how Mom used to run the school book fair? Remember her famous 4th of July pies? Each remember was a nail in a coffin they were building. They were composing my eulogy while I sat there, breathing. The weight of their nostalgia was a physical pressure. I maintained my smile, my nods. I passed the gravy boat. I asked about Robert's work. I performed normality so perfectly it felt like a betrayal of my own truth. Then, as the plates were nearly cleared and the children grew restless, Lily piped up again. Her voice, clear and high, cut through the low hum of patronizing reminiscence. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart." She tilted her head, her expression one of simple curiosity. "Will you be here next Christmas?" The table went utterly quiet. The clink of a fork against a plate sounded like a crash. Every adult eye darted to me, then to each other. It was the question they had all been asking in code, now laid bare by innocence. Chloe's face flushed. "Lily, honey, of course Grandma will—" "I'm asking Grandma," Lily said with a child's bluntness. All the manufactured warmth, the careful subtext, evaporated. This was the moment. They waited for my answer, their faces a mosaic of expectation. Marcus's gentle concern, Chloe's tight-lipped anxiety, Robert's uncertainty. I looked at my granddaughter. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate. The envelope in my pocket seemed to pulse against my leg. The secret, so long and carefully kept, pressed for release. "Next Christmas," I said, my voice calm and clear in the silent room, "is a very long time away. The world is full of possibilities." I held Lily's gaze. "I might be here. I might be somewhere wonderful." A confused smile touched her lips. The adults shifted in their seats. My answer was not the reassurance they wanted. It was a door left open, a crack of light they could not interpret. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound too loud. He reached for his wine glass. "Well," he said, forcing joviality back into his voice, "wherever you are, Mom, you'll be in our hearts." He stood up, tapping his glass with a spoon. "I think it's time for a toast." The relief around the table was palpable. They were back on familiar ground, a sentimental speech, a raised glass, the comfortable narrative. Chloe's smile returned, bright and satisfied. Robert looked down at his lap. Clara picked up her glass. Marcus stood at his place, his figure framed by the dark window behind him. He looked at me, his eyes soft with what he believed was love, but was really a form of ownership. He had the floor. He was about to cement their story into the official record of the evening. I kept my hands in my lap, my fingers brushing the edge of the envelope. The storm of their talk was over. Now came the calm, the moment of dedication. I was ready for it. I had been waiting for it all evening. Marcus cleared his throat, a soft preparatory sound that brought a hush over the table. All faces turned to him, eager for the comfort of the familiar ritual. The candlelight flickered in the lenses of his glasses. "I just wanted to say a few words," he began, his voice taking on the rounded, public tone he used for client presentations. He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person, saving me for last. His gaze, when it landed on me, was soft, damp with sentiment. As we all gather here, in this house that holds so many memories, I'm struck by how lucky we are to have this family, to have this tradition. Chloe nodded, her hand reaching to cover his where it rested on the table, a united front. And at the center of it all, Marcus continued, his voice thickening slightly, has always been Mom. He smiled directly at me. You've been our rock. Through everything. Dad's passing. All our milestones. You were always here. Making this home. The words were not lies. They were truths used as bricks to build a very specific wall. I kept my expression placid, a gentle smile on my lips. I was the portrait of a grateful mother. We know it hasn't been easy, he said, his tone dipping into solemnity. These last few years, adjusting, we've seen how hard you've worked to keep everything going. The garden, this big house, all these traditions. He shook his head in apparent awe. You've never complained. But I had not complained because there had been nothing to complain about. I had found a new rhythm, a different kind of strength. They had misinterpreted quiet competence for silent struggle. That's why this feels like such a special moment, Marcus said, raising his glass slightly. Chloe mirrored the action. Around the table, hands began to lift wine glasses and water goblets. We're all here together, healthy. The kids are growing. And Mom, he paused, swallowing. Mom, you've given us everything, your whole life. The air grew thick. Robert was staring at his plate. Clara had a handkerchief pressed to the corner of her eye. They were all being moved by the performance, by the story he was telling. We look at you, Marcus said, his voice now a near whisper, straining with emotion. And we see the incredible woman who sacrificed so much, and we think about the years ahead. He took a steadying breath. We want you to know it's okay to rest now. It's okay to let us take care of things. You've earned a quiet chapter. A quiet chapter. He made it sound like a reward, a serene, passive drift into twilight. He saw no further pages, no new volumes. Chloe's smile was radiant, triumphant. This was the culmination of their planning, the gentle public ushering of me into the role they had prepared. Marcus finally raised his glass high. So let's raise our glasses to family, to being together, and to Mom. He looked straight at me, his eyes shining. To Mom's final Christmas with us in this house, to all you've been and all you are to us. We love you. To Ellie, Chloe said immediately, her voice bright. To Grandma, the grandchildren chimed. To Mom, Robert murmured, not looking up. The words hung in the room, crystallized. Final Christmas. They had been said. The private assumption was now a public declaration. It was official. They had toasted to the end of my life as I knew it, to the end of my agency. They saw it as a loving tribute, a celebration of a concluded journey. Forks paused, glasses hovered in the air, a forest of crystal catching the light. Every face was turned toward me, awaiting my reaction. A tearful smile, a nod of grateful acceptance, the gracious bowing out of the leading lady. I looked at the raised glass in front of me. The amber sherry looked like liquid amber, trapped and still. I did not touch it. I let the silence stretch a beat too long. I saw the first flicker of uncertainty in Marcus's eyes. Chloe's smile tightened at the edges. I placed my hands flat on the tablecloth on either side of my plate. The linen was smooth and cool under my palms. I felt the weight of the envelope, not just in my pocket, but in the space between heartbeats. This was the inciting incident, as they say, the point of no return. Their toast was the gauntlet thrown, not by malice, but by a profound, insulting certainty. They had written my ending and called it a tribute. I looked up, meeting my son's expectant gaze. I saw the love there, real but blind. I saw the pity. I saw the closed book. My movements were slow, deliberate. I pushed my chair back from the table. The sound of wood on wood was loud in the silent room. I did not stand up quickly. I rose with a measured grace, the same grace I had used 1,000 times as a hostess, as a mother, as a wife. This time, it was different. This time, it was the prelude to a dismantling. I saw Chloe's smile vanish. Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. The extended family members froze, their glasses still suspended, unsure whether to drink or to wait. I stood fully, my spine straight, at the head of the table they believed I was vacating. I looked at their confused, expectant faces. I did not reach for my glass. I reached for the truth. The silence was not merely an absence of sound. It was a substance, thick and heavy, that filled the dining room. No one moved. Glasses remained suspended in the air, forgotten. The only movement was the slow drift of candle smoke toward the ceiling. 20 eyes were fixed on me, wide with a confusion that was quickly curdling into alarm. Marcus's arm, holding his wine aloft, began to lower slowly, mechanically. His face had lost its sentimental sheen. "Mom?" he said, the single word cracking in the middle. I did not answer him immediately. I let the silence work. I placed my napkin neatly folded on the table beside my plate. The simple, deliberate action seemed absurdly loud. I smoothed the front of my dress, feeling the crisp paper of the envelope through the silk. I was in no hurry. They had rushed to bury me. I would take my time rising from their imagined grave. I watched their faces, cataloging the reactions. Marcus, confusion shading into a familiar, frustrated concern. Chloe, her expression had gone blank, then tight. Her mind visibly racing behind her eyes, recalculating. Robert. He had finally looked up, his gaze sharp, almost apprehensive, as if he sensed what his brother had missed. Clara's handkerchief was frozen halfway to her face. The grandchildren watched the adults, sensing the shift but not understanding it. "Ellie, dear, is everything all right?" Clara asked, her voice too high. I offered a small, closed-lipped smile. It was not a smile of reassurance. It was a smile of possession. I owned this moment now. "Everything is quite all right, Clara. Thank you." My voice was calm, steady. It was the voice I used when balancing the household accounts, when explaining a difficult concept to a child. It was not the voice of a woman being honored for her concluded usefulness. The disparity between my tone and the tension in the room was a weapon. I saw Chloe nudge Marcus under the table, a silent command. "Fix this." Marcus cleared his throat again, a nervous habit. "Mom, please, sit down. We didn't mean to overwhelm you. The toast, it was just from the heart." He was backpedaling, trying to stuff the genie of their presumption back into the bottle. He still thought my reaction was one of emotional overwhelm, of a fragile heart touched too deeply. "I am not overwhelmed, Marcus," I said, my hands resting lightly on the back of my chair. "I am listening. You were speaking about my quiet chapter." I let the phrase hang in the air, naked. Stripped of its sentimental context, it sounded like what it was, a plan for my containment. He blinked. "Well, yes, I just meant, we want you to be comfortable, to enjoy your well-earned rest." "My rest," I repeated. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each of the adults in turn. "You have all been so concerned with my rest, with my comfort, with the burden of this house." I paused. "Has it ever occurred to any of you to ask what I want?" The question landed like a stone in a pond. Ripples of discomfort spread. Robert looked down again, guilt flashing across his features. Clara fiddled with her napkin. Chloe's mouth was a thin, pale line. "Of course we want what you want, Mom," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He had never actually asked. "I know you do," I said, and my tone was almost gentle. That gentleness was the final twist of the knife. "Your concern has been so clear in every conversation about downsizing, about stair lifts, about waiting lists for excellent facilities. I saw Chloe flinch at the word waiting list. They had not known I'd overheard. You have built a very thorough plan for my decline. It's not a plan for your decline, Marcus insisted, his face flushing. It's a plan for your security, your peace of mind. And you assumed my peace of mind required a smaller space, a managed life, a final Christmas. I said the last 3 words slowly, giving them their full weight. That was a very specific assumption. The air was now charged, electric with the unspoken. The pretense of a loving tribute was gone, stripped away. We were now in the raw territory of truth. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. My calm was my accusation. I released the back of my chair and took a single step forward toward the center of the table. The movement made Marcus jerk slightly, as if I'd brandished a weapon. In a way, I had. My right hand went to the side seam of my dress, to the hidden pocket I had sewn in myself for this exact purpose. The fabric whispered as my fingers slid inside. I felt the smooth, heavy paper of the envelope. I did not pull it out yet. I let my hand rest there, a promise. "Before we drink to endings," I said, my voice gaining a new formal clarity, "I believe there should be a proper order to things. One does not toast a sunset without first acknowledging the day that preceded it, and one certainly does not declare a day over while the sun is still high in the sky." I looked at Marcus, then at Chloe. "You have proposed a toast to an ending you imagined for me." My fingers tightened on the envelope. "I would like to propose a toast of my own." My fingers closed around the envelope. I drew it from my pocket slowly, allowing the crisp, white rectangle to catch the light. It was not a sentimental card. It was a standard business envelope, the kind that holds contracts or official documents. Its stark normality in the midst of the ornate holiday table was a statement in itself. "I would like to propose a toast," I repeated, my voice firm, "to a beginning." I held the envelope aloft. All eyes locked onto it. Marcus's confusion deepened. Chloe's gaze was analytical, trying to decipher the shape, the weight of it. Robert leaned forward, intrigued. "What is that, Mom?" Marcus asked, his tone wary. "It is a correction," I said simply. I used my thumb to break the seal. The sound was a sharp tear in the quiet room. I reached inside and withdrew 2 documents. I placed the envelope neatly beside my plate and held the papers in front of me. "This," I said, lifting the first one, "is a confirmed one-way ticket. Air France business class departing JFK on January 15th. Destination, Paris, Charles de Gaulle." I let the words settle. There was a collective intake of breath. Clara put a hand to her chest. Marcus's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And this," I continued, lifting the second document, "is a lease agreement, countersigned and notarized, for a furnished apartment, Rue de Grenelle, in the 7th arrondissement. A 12-month lease with an option to renew. It begins on January 20th. I laid the papers flat on the table in front of me, turning them so the text faced Marcus and Chloe. I watched their eyes scan the lines, the official logos, the unmistakable truth of them. The ticket had my name, Eleanor C. Beaumont. The lease agreement had my name and signature. The dates were current. "Paris?" Marcus finally choked out. The word was a strangled thing. "Mom, you can't be serious." "I am entirely serious," I said. "The deposit is paid. The tickets are non-refundable. I have spent the last 18 months planning this." Chloe found her voice, but it was stripped of its earlier warmth. It was cold, practical. "Ellie, this is a massive undertaking. At your age? The logistics alone? The cost? The language barrier? It's not a vacation, it's a relocation." She said "at your age" as if it were a terminal diagnosis. "I am aware of what it is, Chloe," I said. "I speak French, conversationally now, but adequately. I will improve. As for the cost, I have been budgeting. The The grandfather clock, the sterling silver service, the antique armoire from the guest room. They were not downsizing. They were capital. I saw the pieces click together in her mind. Her face lost a shade of color. Her calculations had been wrong. Every item she had noted as a sign of my frailty had been a deliberate step toward my liberation. "You sold Grandma's silver?" Marcus asked, horrified. To him, it was an heirloom. To me, it had been a chain. I did. It bought me 6 months of rent. My answer was factual, without apology. Robert spoke up, a note of awe in his voice. "Paris, Mom? Really?" I turned to him, and for the first time that evening, my smile was genuine, reaching my eyes. "Really, a left bank apartment. It has a balcony that looks over a courtyard. I found it through a reputable agency. The references were extensive." Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is insane. You can't just run off to another country by yourself. What about your health? What about us?" His concern had finally shed its patronizing skin, revealing raw panic beneath. His plan was disintegrating. "My health is excellent, as my doctor confirmed last month. As for you," I said, looking around the table, "you will be here, living your lives, as you should, and I will be living mine. We will visit. Technology exists." "But a year?" Chloe said, her mind clearly tripping over the practical implications. "The children, Lily's school events. Who will—" She trailed off, realizing how terrible it would sound to say, "Who will babysit?" "I am sure you will manage, Chloe," I said, my tone dry. "You are very capable." The room buzzed with a low hum of shock. The grandchildren were whispering, asking what Paris was. The adults were staring at the papers as if they were radioactive. The narrative of my quiet, fading retirement had been shattered. In its place was the vivid, terrifying, exhilarating picture of a transatlantic leap. I picked up my glass of sherry, the one I had ignored during Marcus's toast. I raised it. The pale gold liquid caught the candlelight. "So," I said, my voice clear and carrying, "a toast. Not to an ending, but to a beginning. To the next chapter, which I will write for myself. To Paris in the springtime. To living, not just resting." I looked at their stunned faces, a gallery of disbelief. You may join me or not, but this is my toast. I took a small, deliberate sip. The sherry was sweet and sharp on my tongue. I held the glass aloft, waiting. This was the midpoint, the axis on which the entire evening, the entire family story now turned. The silence that followed my toast was different from the one before it. This was not a respectful hush. It was the dead, airless quiet of a vacuum, immediately before the implosion. Then, chaos erupted. Marcus's control snapped. "You cannot do this!" His voice was too loud, cracking across the table. He knocked over his wine glass in his agitation. A dark red stain spread rapidly across the white linen, like a Rorschach test of panic. He didn't notice. "Paris? A year? Mom, have you lost your mind? You're not some college kid backpacking through Europe." Chloe was staring at the lease agreement, her fingers pressing into the tablecloth as if she could erase the words. "January 20th, she said, her voice flat. "That's in less than a month. The children, the spring break plans." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw naked anger in her eyes, sharp and cold. "You didn't think to discuss this with us, to consider how this affects everyone?" "You did not discuss Silver Springs with me," I replied, my tone even. "You discussed it about me. There is a difference." Lassim, my sister-in-law Clara, found her voice, wobbly with concern. "Ellie, it's so far away. What if you fall? What if you get sick? The medical system. It's not what you're used to." "I have purchased comprehensive international health insurance," I said. "The policy details are in my study. I have researched French healthcare. It is excellent." Robert was the only one not looking at me with accusation or fear. He was looking at the ticket, A slow smile was spreading across his face. "Business class, Mom. Nice." Marcus whirled on him. "Don't encourage this, Rob. This isn't a joke. She's being completely irrational." "Why?" Robert asked, finally meeting his brother's glare. "Because she didn't follow your script? You had her all tucked into a nice quiet little ending. She just ripped up the last page and started a new book. I think it's brilliant." His words were a gift. They gave Marcus a tangible target for his frustration. "Brilliant? It's reckless and selfish." And he turned his fury back to me. "Do you have any idea the worry you'll cause? We'll be sick with concern every single day." "You have been sick with concern for 2 years, Marcus," I said, still standing, still calm at the head of the table. "Your concern has been a constant low-grade fever in this family. It has dictated your conversations, your plans, your view of me. I am offering you a cure. You will no longer need to worry about my stairs or my garden or my silver. You can worry about something real, or better yet, not worry at all." Chloe stood up now, her movement stiff. "This is about more than worry, Ellie. This is about responsibility. You have a family, grandchildren who need you." "Grandchildren who live a 30-minute drive away," I said. "They will not cease to exist because I am in Paris. We will video call. They can visit in the summer. I am not dying, Chloe. I am relocating." "It feels like a betrayal," she shot back, her composure crumbling into something harder. "We were planning for your comfort, for your safety, and you were secretly planning an escape." The word escape hung in the air. It was the most honest thing anyone had said all night. "Yes," I acknowledged quietly, "I was." My confirmation seemed to stun her into silence. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exasperation. "So all this, the French lessons on your iPad we thought were just games, the selling of things. It was all a conspiracy?" "It was a plan," I corrected. "A plan I made for myself because it was clear no one else was going to make one with me in mind as a living, breathing person. You saw a widow winding down. I saw a woman with time, resources, and a deep desire to see the Jardin du Luxembourg in person before she truly was too old to enjoy it. The table was a tableau of disarray. The spilled wine formed an ugly blot. Plates of half-eaten prime rib congealed. Napkins were crumpled. The children, sensing the adult storm, had gone quiet and wide-eyed. "And the house?" Marcus demanded, grasping for a practical foothold. "You're just going to leave it empty? That's a terrible idea." "The house will not be empty," I said. "I have arranged for a property management company. They will handle maintenance. I have also spoken to a reputable rental agency. I am considering a medium-term furnished rental to vetted tenants. The income will cover the Paris lease and then some. The details are in a folder on my desk." Each calmly delivered fact was a brick removed from the wall of their objections. With every sentence, their flailing grew more desperate because their foundation, the belief that I was incapable of complex planning, was gone. Chloe sat down heavily, as if the wind had been knocked out of her. Her gaze was inward, recalculating a future that no longer included a readily available grandmother, a house to eventually inherit unencumbered, a manageable dependent. Her vision was in shambles. Marcus just stared at me, his anger giving way to a baffled hurt. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, his voice finally dropping. I looked at my son, at the genuine pain in his eyes. This was the core of it. The betrayal he felt was real, even if it was born of his own arrogance. "Because," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "you would have tried to stop me. You would have listed reasons. You would have called it a phase, a folly. You would have loved me straight into a cage. I did not want to have that fight for 18 months. I chose to have it tonight when my plans were concrete and irreversible. It seemed more efficient." The brutal honesty of it left him speechless. He looked at the ticket, at the lease, at the spilled wine on the table his father had built. The The perfect narrative of the evening of my life was in ruins, and I was the one who had calmly, deliberately pushed the first domino. His question hung in the ruined air of the dining room. Why didn't you tell us? It was the plea of a child who has broken a toy and cannot understand why it no longer works. I looked at his face, at the genuine wound there, and I knew the time for facts was over. Now was the time for truth. I didn't tell you, I began, my voice losing none of its calm, because you had already decided you knew. You saw what you wanted to see, every piece of evidence that pointed to a different conclusion. You twisted to fit your narrative. I remained standing. It gave me the height, the psychological advantage. They were seated in their disorder, and I was above it, clear-eyed. The French lessons, I said, looking at Chloe. You saw me on my iPad and assumed I was playing word games. Keeping my mind sharp, you called it. You never once asked what I was learning. If you had listened, you might have heard me practicing pronunciation with my headphones on. You heard an old woman muttering to herself. I shifted my gaze to Marcus. The grandfather clock, the silver, the armoire. You saw downsizing. A sensible reduction of burdens. You never asked why I chose those particular items. They were the most valuable, yes, but they were also the heaviest. Not physically, emotionally. Each one was a monument to a past life. I cashed in the monuments to buy a future. Clara dabbed her eyes. But Ellie, you seemed so withdrawn, so quiet. I was focused, I corrected her. When you are building something new in secret, you conserve your energy. You don't waste it on conversations about the weather or the decline of the neighborhood. My quiet was not emptiness. It was concentration. I picked up the lease agreement again. This did not fall from the sky. It required research, dozens of emails, video tours with a rental agent at 6 a.m. my time, legal reviews of a contract in French. You thought my time was spent waiting for your visits. It was spent negotiating with a notaire in Paris. Marcus shook his head, a slow, disbelieving motion. You're saying we never really looked at you. You looked at the role, I said. The mother, the widow, the grandmother. You did not look at the person. When I said I was fine, you heard polite denial. When I said I was busy, you heard me filling empty hours. Your concern became a filter that distorted everything I said and did. I took a slow breath. This was the core of my revenge, not the Paris plan itself, but the revelation of their blindness. I knew about Silver Springs, Marcus. His head snapped up. What? The woman at the hair salon, Janet. Her mother is at Silver Springs. She mentioned to me, quite casually months ago, that she'd seen you and Chloe on a tour. She thought I knew. I let that sink in. So I knew. I knew you were scouting my next place without me. I knew there was a wait list, and I watched. I watched every subsequent conversation, every hint about communities and stairs, and I saw the blueprint of your plans for me. Chloe's face was ashen. Her secret practical plotting had been known all along. Her sense of managerial efficiency was exposed as clumsy and transparent. That was the moment, I continued, when I decided you'd already written my ending, so I decided to write a better one, a truer one. Every step I took after that was deliberate. I let you believe what you wanted. I allowed your assumptions to solidify. Because the more certain you were of my path, the greater the impact when you realized I was on a different road entirely. Robert let out a low whistle. You played the long game, Mom. I lived my life, I said. There is a difference. You mistook strategy for senescence. I looked around at their faces, now stripped of condescension, filled with varying degrees of shock, dawning shame, and in Robert's case, admiration. You thought I was done. You toasted to it. You believed my best days were behind me, preserved in your childhood memories. You wanted to preserve me in amber, but I am not a relic. I am a living woman, and I am not done. The finality in my voice brooked no argument. I had laid it all out. Their unspoken plans, my secret counter moves, their profound misreading of every signal. The revenge was not in going to Paris. The revenge was in revealing that I had watched them plot my gentle decline and had used the very energy they thought was fading to build a catapult to launch myself out of it. This was not a sudden whim, I said, gesturing to the documents. This was a campaign, and tonight, when you so kindly provided the perfect public moment to declare my life a beautiful concluded thing, that was my D-Day. You presented the beach, I landed. Marcus had no words. He looked utterly hollowed out. The foundation of his worldview, the capable son managing his aging mother's gentle transition, had been vaporized. He was not the manager. He had been the subject of a quiet, elegant operation. Chloe finally spoke, her voice stripped of all pretense, leaving only a cold, hard core. So this is punishment. For caring. For trying to plan. I met her gaze. This is emancipation. From your plans. My life is not a problem for you to solve, Chloe. It is my own to live. You mistook my compliance for consent. I am now withdrawing that compliance. I sat down then, finally. The action was simple, but it felt like a period at the end of a long, devastating sentence. I had said what I needed to say. The quiet that returned to the room was not the same as before. It was exhausted. It was the quiet after a battle, when the field is covered in the wreckage of certainties. The silence after my final words was a physical presence. It was the quiet of a courtroom after a verdict has been read, when all arguments are exhausted. I had presented my case. The jury of my family was now left to reckon with a truth that offered no comfort. Clara was the first to move. She pushed her chair back, the legs screeching on the hardwood floor. I think I'll start clearing, she murmured, not meeting anyone's eyes. She reached for her own plate, then Marcus's, her movements jerky. The normalcy of the action was absurd, but it provided a script for others to follow. Robert stood up. I'll help. He began gathering glasses, avoiding the sticky pool of spilled wine around Marcus's place setting. Marcus did not move. He sat in his father's chair, staring at the stained tablecloth as if it held a code he could not decipher. His earlier anger had collapsed into a stunned inertia. Chloe watched him for a moment. Then her lips tightened. She rose, her posture rigid, and began stacking dessert plates with sharp, efficient clicks. I stood as well. There was no reason to remain seated. The performance was over. I picked up my own plate and the serving platter for the prime rib, now holding only a carcass of bone and congealed fat. I carried them into the kitchen. The kitchen was a sanctuary of familiar order. I placed the platter in the sink and began to run hot water. Clara came in behind me, her arms full. She didn't speak. Robert followed, then Chloe, each adding to the pile of dirty china on the counter. We moved around each other in the brightly lit room, a silent, dysfunctional ballet. The cheerful Christmas music I had put on earlier had long since ended, leaving only the rush of water and the clatter of porcelain. Through the pass-through window, I could see Marcus still sitting at the table, a solitary figure amid the wreckage. Lily and her brother had been shepherded into the living room by Robert's wife, and the low murmur of a cartoon provided a surreal soundtrack. Chloe spoke first, her voice low and aimed at the sink. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Property managers, tenants, international insurance. I tried to be thorough, I said, scrubbing a serving spoon. Thorough, she repeated, the word biting. She placed a stack of plates down with more force than necessary. You were thorough in your deception. I was thorough in living my life, I corrected without heat. You just weren't invited to the planning stages. She turned to look at me, her eyes hard. You've hurt him, you know, deeply. I glanced through the window at my son, still frozen. I know, but the hurt was already there, Chloe. It was woven into the fabric of his assumptions. I simply pulled the thread. Robert, loading the dishwasher, let out a short, quiet laugh. He caught my eye and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a gesture of bewildered respect. The cleanup was completed with a cold, efficient speed. The dining room was restored to a state of empty order, the stained cloth the only testament to the upheaval. The mood shifted toward departure. It was a palpable need in the air, a collective desire to escape the scene of the crime. Coats were retrieved from the closet. The children, sensing the tension, were quiet and compliant. Clara hugged me quickly, her embrace stiff. "Call me," she whispered, though it was unclear if it was a plea or a command. Robert hugged me tighter, longer. "I want the address," he said quietly in my ear. "I'm coming to visit. Seriously." When he pulled back, he was smiling a little. "Knock 'em dead, Mom." Chloe herded the children out the door with a curt, "Say goodbye to Grandma." The goodbyes were muted. She did not meet my eyes, offering only a stiff nod from the doorway. That left Marcus. He had finally risen and put on his coat. He stood in the foyer looking at me, his face aged by confusion and hurt. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice raw. "I know you don't," I said, "and I am sorry for that. But understanding is not a prerequisite for my life, Marcus." "Are you really going?" he asked, as if hoping it had all been a terrible joke. "On the 15th of January, I confirmed. "The tickets are electronic. You can see the confirmation in my email if you'd like." He flinched at the offer of proof. He shook his head slowly. I thought we were close." "We were," I said. "But closeness cannot be based on a fiction. You were close to an idea of me. Now you have a chance to be close to the reality. It is up to you whether you take it." He had no answer for that. He turned and walked out the door into the cold night without another word. I closed the door behind him. The latch clicked with a solid, final sound. I turned off the porch light. I walked back through the silent house, turning off lamps. The Christmas tree glowed in the living room, its lights too cheerful for the emptiness. I returned to the dining room. I stood at the head of the table, now bare, except for the wine-stained cloth. I would deal with that tomorrow. For now, I looked at the empty chairs. The ghosts of their expectations still lingered, but they were faint, already dissipating. The revenge was complete, not because I had hurt them, though I had, but because I had reclaimed the narrative of this room, of this house, of my own life. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was mine. It was the quiet not of an ending, but of an intermission. The next act was waiting, and for the first time in years, I was the only one writing the lines. The morning sun through my bedroom window was clear and cold, falling in sharp geometric shapes across the open suitcase on my bed. The house was silent, but it was a different silence from the night before. The tension had drained away, leaving behind a clean, empty space, like a room after a storm has passed. I felt no regret. I felt a light, sharp clarity. I worked methodically. The large suitcase was for practicalities: wool sweaters, sturdy walking shoes, a warm coat, my rain jacket. The carry-on would hold my laptop, my important documents in a leather folio, my French grammar books, and a change of clothes. Each item I placed inside was chosen with intention. This was not the frantic packing of a vacation. It was the deliberate curation of a new life. As I folded a cashmere sweater, my phone vibrated on the dresser. I knew who it would be. I finished placing the sweater in the suitcase before I walked over and looked at the screen. Marcus. I picked it up. "Hello, Marcus. Mom." His voice sounded thick, tired. "Did you sleep?" "I did. Quite well." A pause. I could hear him breathing. "I didn't. I've been up all night thinking." I said nothing. I waited. "I owe you an apology," he began, the words coming out in a rehearsed rush. "The toast? It was insensitive. We never meant to make you feel obsolete. We were worried. We love you." "I know you love me," I said. My voice was calm, and I accept your apology for the toast. It was, as you say, insensitive." He seemed to gain a little momentum. "Good, that's good. Look, about Paris, can we talk about it? Really talk. Maybe there's a compromise, a shorter trip, a guided tour with a group for seniors. Something safer. We could all go with you next year. Make it a family thing." There it was. The compromise. The reins. He was offering to give me a version of my dream, but a version safely managed, sanitized, and on his terms. The apology was real, but the mindset was unchanged. I was still a problem to be solved, a variable to be controlled. "No, Marcus," I said, my tone leaving no room for discussion. "Mom, please be reasonable. You're not seeing the risks. Living alone in a foreign city? At your age? What if something happens?" "What if something happens here?" I countered. "I live alone now. A fall in the shower here is no different from a fall in the shower there, except that in Paris I have arranged for a concierge service that checks on elderly tenants twice a week. I do not have that here." He was silent for a moment, thrown by the practical detail. "You've arranged that?" "Yes, it is part of the lease agreement. My safety, as you can see, has been considered." "But why does it have to be so extreme? So final? A whole year? You're cutting us out." I walked to the window, the phone to my ear, and looked out at my winter garden. "You had already cut me out, Marcus. You had cut me out of my own future. You decided what it should look like without consulting me. This is not an act of cutting you out. It is an act of reclaiming my own narrative. There is a difference." "So this is still about punishment," he said, and I heard the hurt hardening into resentment. "It is about sovereignty," I corrected. "You keep offering me a smaller cage and calling it a compromise. I am refusing all cages." "That's not fair. We're not trying to cage you." "Your version of my life is a cage, a comfortable, loving cage, but a cage nonetheless. You have decided what I am capable of, what I should want, what constitutes a good risk. Those decisions are not yours to make. Not anymore." The line was quiet for a long time. I could hear the defeat settling into his silence. He had run out of arguments. He had offered apology and compromise, and I had rejected the core premise of both. "I don't know how to be your son if I'm not looking out for you," he said finally, his voice small. "You can be my son by being happy for me," I said, and for the first time in the conversation, I let a thread of softness into my voice. It was not weakness. It was a choice. "You can be my son by asking me about my neighborhood in Paris, about the museums I plan to visit, by trusting that I have the sense and the ability to navigate this. You can be my son by seeing me as a person who is living, not just as your mother, who is aging." "It's a big change," he whispered. "It is," I agreed. "For both of us. Change is not inherently bad. It is just change." I heard him sigh, a long, weary exhalation. The fight had gone out of him. He was facing a wall he could not scale. My unwavering will. "Will you, at least, call when you land?" he asked. It was a surrender, small and grudging. "Of course, and I will send you the link for the video calls. Lily can show me her school projects." "Okay," he said, "just that. Okay, Mom. I love you, Marcus." "I love you too." He paused. "Be careful." "I will be." The call ended. I placed the phone back on the dresser. The conversation was over. I had held my ground without raising my voice, without anger. I had been gentle, but I had been immovable. That was the true climax. The dinner was the detonation. This was the settling of the dust, the clear line drawn in it. I returned to my packing. I folded a stack of blouses and placed them in the suitcase. I added my passport, already in its new leather holder, to the folio. The sunlight moved across the bed, warming the dark fabric of the suitcase. I felt a profound peace. The battle was over. I had won. Not by defeating him, but by rendering the point of conflict obsolete. He could no longer fight for control of a future I had already seized. All that was left was for him to adjust to the new reality. I zipped the suitcase closed. The sound was definitive. I wheeled it to the corner of the room where it stood, solid and ready. It was no longer just a piece of luggage. It was an artifact of my emancipation. In 3 weeks, it would be wheels up over the Atlantic. For now, it stood in the corner of my sunlit room, a promise I had made to myself and had the strength to keep. The small round table was cold beneath my fingertips, the marble still holding the chill of the December Parisian morning. I adjusted my phone against the sugar bowl, ensuring the camera captured the backdrop of the cafe window and the bustling Rue du Cherche-Midi beyond. It was New Year's Eve, but here, at 10 in the morning, the day was just beginning. My espresso steamed in its tiny cup next to a glass of water. I had been in Paris for 2 weeks. The video call connected, and their faces appeared in a grid on my screen. They were in Marcus's living room, the familiar fireplace and garlands behind them. It was early there, but they were all together. Marcus, Chloe, Robert, his wife, the children. Clara was there too. They looked expectant, slightly uncertain. "There she is," Robert said, his smile immediate and wide. "Look at you, in a cafe. Are you actually wearing a beret?" "I am not wearing a beret, Robert," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "It is a wool cloche hat. It is practical." "It looks very French," Clara said, her voice warm but her eyes searching my image, looking for signs of strain or unhappiness. She found none. "Grandma, do you have croissants?" Lily asked, pressing her face close to the camera. "I have already eaten a croissant, Lily. It was excellent, but now I am having my coffee." Marcus had been quiet, just watching. "How are you, Mom? Really?" The old question, but this time the tone was different. It held a genuine, hesitant curiosity, not assumption. "I am well, Marcus, truly. The apartment is better than the photos. The elevator works. The market on the corner is magnificent. I have learned how to ask for chicken correctly. Last week I asked for a chat instead of a poulet. The butcher was very amused." I relayed the incident factually. It was a small failure, but it was mine. He almost smiled. "A cat instead of a chicken?" "Indeed, we corrected the error. I have the chicken." A beat of silence passed. Chloe spoke next. Her voice was carefully neutral. "And the neighbors? Are they friendly?" "The woman across the hall is a retired pianist from the conservatoire. She invited me for tea on Christmas Day. We communicated in a mixture of French, English, and hand gestures. It was perfectly pleasant." I did not add that it had been one of the most stimulating afternoons I'd had in years. I let the fact stand for itself. I could see them processing. The concrete details, the elevator, the butcher, the pianist, were dismantling their imagined scenarios of my loneliness and struggle. I was not adrift. I was engaged in the minute, fascinating business of daily life in a new place. "We miss you, Grandma," my grandson said, his face serious. "I miss you too," I said, and it was true. But the truth was not a wound. It was a thread connecting 2 continents. "But we can do this often. You can show me your new toys. I can show you the Eiffel Tower from my balcony later. It is very small from this distance, but it is there." The children clamored to see, so I switched the camera view for a moment, panning slowly across the view from my table, the zinc bar, the sleepy waiter, the street where people walked with baguettes under their arms. I turned it back to my face. "It looks wonderful, Ellie," Clara said, and this time her smile reached her eyes. Robert raised a mug of what was likely coffee. "To Mom, in Paris." I looked at the screen, at their faces. Marcus's expression was complex. There was sadness there, a lingering hurt, but also a dawning, reluctant respect. Chloe's smile was polite, but I could see her recalculating. I was not a problem requiring management. I was a person living abroad. The category was different. I picked up my espresso cup. The porcelain was warm. "I would like to make a toast," I said. They quieted, their faces attentive. Last month you toasted to an ending you perceived. Today I would like to toast to the beginning that is. I looked directly into the camera, meeting each of their eyes as best I could. To new beginnings, wherever they may be found, may we all be brave enough to recognize them. I lifted the small cup. On the screen, they lifted their mugs and glasses, coffee, orange juice, water. To new beginnings, Marcus repeated, his voice soft. His eyes held mine on the screen. There was a connection there, fragile, but real. It was not the connection of a manager and his charge. It was the connection of two adults, one finally seeing the other. "To Grandma's adventure!" Lily shouted, and everyone laughed, the tension dissolving into the simple, warm sound of family, reshaped but intact. We talked for a few more minutes about their plans for the evening, about the frigid weather back home. The conversation was normal, almost ordinary. The earthquake had passed. We were learning to walk on the new landscape. "I should let you go," I said finally. "You have a day of preparation. I have a museum to visit before the crowds get too large." "Which museum?" Robert asked. "The Musée de la Vie Romantique. It is small. I hear the tea room is excellent." We said our goodbyes with promises to call again next week. The screen went dark. I placed my phone back in my bag. I took the last, now cool, sip of my espresso. I left euros on the table for the waiter and stepped out onto the street. The air was crisp, smelling of bread and diesel and winter. I pulled my coat tighter and began to walk with no particular hurry toward the museum. The revenge was complete, but it felt like too small a word for what had happened. It was not about their punishment. It was about my liberation. The proof was in this moment, in the simple act of walking down a Parisian street with a day entirely my own to fill. I had redefined myself. For them, and most importantly, for me. The family relationship was changed, perhaps scarred in places, but it was honest now. It was built on the reality of who I was, not who they needed me to be. I turned a corner, the museum plaque coming into view. My steps were steady on the cobblestones. The story they had tried to close was wide open, and I was only on the first page of a new chapter, written in my own hand. The silence around me was not empty. It was full of potential, and it was all mine.